Welcome back to the show. Hello, you beautiful, lovely marvels. I am back with my esteemed, brilliant colleague.
God. Yeah.
Wow, way to take a compliment, Dana.
Right back at you. How's that? Yeah.
Love it. Hi, Dana.
How you doing?
Dana, hi. I'm good. I feel like I just saw you.
Isn't that weird? It's like
So
deja vu all
strange.
over again. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. It's a really wonderful Groundhog Day, I guess. Hey, Dana, we are talking about something today that is so funny just because when you brought it up off air the last time, like, you know,
Yeah.
when Dana and I like do a little planning before we hop on a podcast episode. But
Yeah.
Dana, introduce your topic.
So spitting in the soup.
Whose soup? Whose soup are you spitting in?
So this is a concept I learned in graduate school. It's an Adlerian thing. I went to the Adler school. And when I first learned this, it was a guy named Harold Mozak, who's kind of a big Adlerian. And he was talking about this. And I'm like, does it have to be spit? Spit is like one of my total phobias. It just totally grosses me out. I mean, like
So
if I want to
disgusting.
hurl. So it's a powerful image. Let me explain what it means. So if we're working with someone in therapy or you have an issue that you have, and this is the way we all operate in the world, whether you're talking about cognitive behavioral, psychodynamic, whatever it is, they can all share this idea of we all operate with basic assumptions and we kind of move through the world based on how we see schemas and, you know, we sort of run on autopilot, right? And so that's also the case for our basic personality and how we cope and those kinds of things. So if you, and this sort of goes along with this idea of acting as if, which is another Adlerian thing. And that really is new stimulus in the world can be so overwhelming that if like every day you left the house, you had to think about how to start your car and drive. Remember the first time you got to drive, you're like, oh my God. We act as if we get in an elevator, it's going to work and not drop us to our deaths, right? If we were aware of all those, there's a lot of really powerful stuff in Adlerian therapy. If we're aware of all these things, we would be paralyzed and we'd never move. So we act as if, and we do a lot of these things on automatic pilot. Okay, so there's that. Then there's this idea of whether you call them defenses or ways of interacting with other people. Like when you said, "Oh, you gave me that compliment," and I was like, "Oh my God," that was like an automatic response, right? It's a conditioned response that I have as a woman in this culture, raised being told, you know, don't be prideful and, you know, be humble and blah blah blah, and all. That's a really good example of like an automatic way something works, right? If it's something that is causing problems, right, or you have a set of ideas in your head that are causing you pain or harm, what we do is we bring them to your awareness and we say, oh, okay, did you know you're doing that? And someone might say, no, I'm not aware of that. And you say, well, what might be the reason you're doing that? Oh, I'm doing that because I don't want to be the center of attention. And then you can kind of dig in, like, what does it mean to be the center of attention? And then I could say, okay, so notice that this week, like when you feel like you're the center of attention, and what other thoughts come with it? Do you go to like, I'm not good enough or whatever those might be, right? Now, when it happens, the automatic part happens, it doesn't work the same. So I have spit in your soup. Now, if I spit in your soup back in the kitchen and you didn't know it was there, that's not the point. Then you're like happily eating your soup and you're not even aware of something. If I spit in it in front of you, now you know it's in there and you're like, oh God. So now I've changed your percept, right? That's why they call it that. I remember it, right? 30 years later. So this idea of if I as a therapist can sort of implant that, and then the next time you do it, it doesn't work quite the same. This really works well with things like addiction, like, oh, I came home, I'm exhausted. I had clients of mine that are like, you know, I just need a beer to unwind. And I say, okay. And then that leads to 2 and leads to 3. next time when you're having your second one, think of me going, what are you doing? Right. So the idea is to plant that idea in their head that I've spit in their soup. And then they could go ahead and have the second beer, but it doesn't quite taste the same anymore, right? Because they know. So it really is this version of bringing things that aren't in awareness into your awareness. And why do we do that? Because now it actually isn't operating automatically, and now you have some efficacy. Now you have some choice, and you have some things that you can do about it. As horrible as that, every time I've explained this concept to a client and I say it's called spitting in the soup, and they're like, what? They always remember it though, right? So it's this idea of trying to empower you or give you a tool to be aware of a behavior you're doing automatically that you don't necessarily want to do automatically, or you just want to be able to be mindful of. So if I get defensive with someone and I've had my soup spit in, that might give me just a break enough to go, why am I getting defensive? Right? Why am I doing that? Why am I automatically trying to backpedal and not be wrong about something if I'm defensive versus, oh, yeah, Dana said that spitting in my soup. Maybe this is actually because I actually fear that person right now, and I'm feeling like they have the power to hurt me. Now I have other avenues. I can not operate automatically, or I can remove myself from that situation, or I can tell them, I'm afraid you're going to hurt me, right? It sort of is like another version of turning around in your scary basement as you're running up the stairs to see if there really is a boogeyman there. And I'll use that analogy too. And people will say, but what if there really is a boogeyman there? And I say, yeah, but then now you know what you're up against. You're not living the fantasy of not knowing, or it could be this little teeny thing, or there could be nothing there. And then you realize it's all in your own mind. Any one of those scenarios, you're better equipped because now you're not at the power of them. You have choice in what you do. And that's what that idea of spitting in the soup is, right?
Yeah.
You have to know your soup's been spit in though for it to work.
Yeah. It's almost like, and I love this kind of, I think in other kind of models of therapy, this might be called like challenging, doing a little thought challenge or thought reframe, these types of things. But, we do have a narrative that is reflexive. I mean, it's there for a reason. We talked about this in our in-group versus out-group
we'd never leave the house. Like I said, we'd be totally overstimulated. Yeah.
And I think the brain, the brain is really trying to be as efficient as possible. It really needs to automate as much as possible to leave room for making meaning and protecting itself against danger. This is what it's meant for. And so when it doesn't serve you, when there's a narrative, a self-narrative that doesn't serve, to be able to bring it to light and be more presently minded with it, so that we can shift it. It's difficult. Like, this is not easy, but I love the spitting in the soup because when I think about it, I never want to eat that soup again. Like, my mouth, like I have a visceral reaction.
Yeah, or if you do, you're like, oh, I really don't want to do this again. Yeah.
Hey, Dana, for those in the audience, we talk about CBT a lot, cognitive behavioral therapy. We've even mentioned DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy as well. And of course, psychoanalysis, our dear Freud. We haven't gotten into psychodynamic at all or anything, but will you tell the audience kind of the theoretical kind of understanding of Adlerian?
So that there are some major schools of thought in addition to the ones that you just mentioned. One is person-centered, which is Carl Rogers sort of pioneered that. And the idea that he had was the client really leads you and you follow them. And then there's also something called psychodynamic. And some of these schools of thought aren't just sort of how you do therapy, but they're also have an origin theory, like how things form the way they do, how they got entrenched that way. And so psychodynamic is you are interested in someone's childhood and what's formed them and ideas they hold and how they move through the world and those kinds of things. And Adlerian therapy is really sort of a combo between person-centered and psychodynamic. We're definitely interested in, what you learned early and then what ways you learn to move through the world and what ways you learn to view the world to, like you said, for that organizing principle for your brain, and which ones work and which ones don't necessarily work, right? But Adler also said all those things are adaptive. Behavior is purposeful. And what he meant by that was, if I'm the type of person that goes home and drinks after work because that's how I'm coping, that fits into my way of being. Whereas for me, I don't. I grew up in an alcoholic family system, and I'm like, that wouldn't be something I would want to do. But there might be something else I do. Why, as a human, would you continue to do something unless it serves some purpose? There's no reason to, right? So instead of saying, well, you're drinking, we need to stop your drinking, and you need to stop. And when you come home and you're stressed, so what? Don't drink. We want to look at, how is this serving you? Why have you gravitated towards this? What does this give you? It sort of is like it makes sense that you're doing that model. And now the awareness gets brought in, like, oh, I'm doing that because I don't have these other ways of unwinding, or I'm just wanting to numb out. I don't want to think about anything, or whatever it is for that person, right? I want my own locus of control. I want to decide if I get drunk. Whatever it is, it serves that person's kind of who they are. And so we try to figure out who they are and figure out things that work and don't work. We would use the word adaptive and not adaptive, but even that has some sort of latent meaning to it. So that sense of, is it causing you hurt or not, and those kinds of things. And having people understand where they come from and why they do what they do. It's a very shame-free model, which is what I think when I graduated, I was so sick of hearing about. We learned other methods, but this one, and I'm like, I'm not an Adlerian. And then every time I talk about what I'm doing, I'm like, God, that sounds awfully Adlerian. Yeah. But I think it's because it's a pretty holistic model. It also, a little history lesson, Alfred Adler studied with Freud in the Vienna Circle, and he thought Freud's model was too deterministic and too pathologizing. And so he split from that circle. They kind of kicked him out because he wanted to have more of a systems model and say, the fishbowl within someone is swimming matters. What is their culture? What is their family? What is their community? All those things have an effect on the person. And he was really interested in interplay between all those things. And then Bronfenbrenner came along and talked more about that and those kinds of things. But that was the primary reason he wanted to do that, was to destigmify. And the person-centered part of it was along the lines of, I'm not the expert telling you what's wrong with you, like psychoanalytic is. It's more of a collaborative, like, let's explore this together. I have some skills to help you figure out who you are, but it doesn't mean I'm going to tell you who you are. We need to figure that out together. So those kinds of methods tend to, in this day and age, it serves me well as a therapist. People feel seen because I want to, I had a client that used to come in every week singing from The King and I, getting to know you, but he was talking about himself, like, getting to know me. I'm like, yeah, that's what we want to be doing, is getting to know the aspects of you so you know yourself really well. And so I can get to know yourself really well. And then you can make some decisions. Is this an old legacy piece that you're carrying that really belongs to your mom and it isn't yours? We can work on letting that go, along those lines. So I like holistic models. And I don't think any therapist really practices a single model. Even people I know that are hardcore CBT, I'm like, well, is the relationship important to you? Oh yeah, of course. If you were a hardcore CBTer, it wouldn't matter. No, of course. So no one is practicing any one school purely. It just isn't a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And what do we know? I mean, lots of research out there about, and they've done research on which models are more effective. And it always comes down to the relationship.
The relationship
between the therapist and the client is the biggest predictor of effectiveness.
And that has to do with fit, right? So if I try something with you and it doesn't work, if I stay rigid in my model, you're going to leave, versus if I say, oh, that didn't work, what else can we do? Now that person feels heard, and now the relationship. So it's not just like, oh, I like that person. It's, do they see me? Do they hear me? Do I feel like they're getting me accurately and all? And that makes sense. Like, how many of us have gone to see our MD and we're complaining about one thing and they're like, that's not what it is. And then you just feel like crap.
Yeah.
But then you get vengeance when they're like, but that thing you have is really rare. And then you get proof that you have it. And then you're like, oh, there it was. You're going to have to bleep. And there it was. Yeah. So that there really is that idea of the person living in that skin
Yeah.
knows. And you have to,
Yeah.
I want to listen to that. I want to know what their knowing is. As Gwen
Well,
writes down the mile marker so she can bleep out my.
yeah, I'm just writing down the timing so that I can bleep Dana. But I'm really good at it now. Dana's given me lots of opportunities for practice.
There
It's
you
also
go.
it's a mastery. It's my feelings of mastery. It's
That's
wonderful. I think that, as we're talking about, spitting in the soup, right? Which is really a therapeutic
Yeah, it's like a
intervention
tool.
exercise kind of idea. Where it's housed, where it's living, the framework, systems do matter. I think especially for the neurodiverse community, the environments in which they live and they work and they're in, the people in those environments are so influential and impactful in their well-being.
Yeah.
And so really understanding who you are and how you work. No judgment. Like, this is who I am. This is how I work the best. This is how I thrive. Much like, a habitat. We understand this with plants and animals. We understand that, plants who need humidity and sunlight do very poorly in the desert. I mean, like, we understand these things. I don't know why we don't understand this with human beings.
Right.
Right. But we know that for this community, having a systems approach or an ecological approach where I am, who I'm surrounded by, that really, I can look as good or bad as that environment.
Yeah, for sure. And it really is that idea of looking at that system and can that system make accommodation? Can they move around that or just even understand? Like, does that person get why you're reacting a certain way? Yeah.
Yeah. Am I accepted? Do I feel a sense of belonging? These types of very core principles. And,
do
Dana
I
and
feel
I can't help.
Seen? Yeah.
Do I feel seen? Right. And Dana and I are trained psychologists. So we're going to go back to these types of models, and the ways in which we think about our kind of our operating systems for the way in which we think about how people work, but spitting in the soup, back to that, it's a challenge. It's a challenge of something that's not serving you. And so, if you need help, just get one of your friends to spit in your soup.
I've done spitting in my own soup where I'm like, okay, I realize I do this. It's not a good thing. Think about this next time you're doing it. What's that?
Did it work for you? Spitting
in your own soup? I mean, yeah. Because I'm like, oh, I'm doing that. So next time this happens, I want to be really aware of what's 3 steps down the road that I try to be blind to. And then it just doesn't work the same anymore.
Yeah. My therapist used to call it like just blinders. Like you've got your blinders on and it's like kind of uncharacteristic of you. And, and here you are in this mess again. Usually for me, it's being loose-lipped about something. And I'm like, oh,
but it's
why did I say that?
It's it's really is that what your origin story is again, right?
Yeah.
Why are you this way and why did it work or why was it taught to you? And then, can you change it or maybe you don't want to change it? Maybe you're okay with it.
Yeah. And we're a product of our cumulative experiences. We do today what has worked for us.
Yeah.
Does that serve us all the time? No, it doesn't. But there's a reason why we do what we do. And so to be able to remain curious and compassionate with yourself is important because, when you're like the judge, jury, and executioner, it's hard in there. Like it can be really, really a tough space to live in a head.
Yep.
And so how do we like move away from that and not believe everything our mind says? Which is just kind of another layer of this. But I mean, in the audience, you know, if how has someone spit in your soup?
Yeah. Yeah. Have you been aware of that? Yeah. Has it worked?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Mhm.
you know, on the path, you know, this is like on the path to a greater well-being for each of us, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. That's just
that
basic
we,
learning, right? When
yeah.
you are aware of the context, sometimes it isn't the same anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is great, which is great. And this is why we need spaces to have conversations, safe spaces to look at ourselves, safe
Right.
spaces to have differing opinions. This is how we do that. We don't do that by being in an echo chamber. And we just think we're always right, and we surround ourselves with people that always think that we're right. That's not actually how we
Wasn't that one of the
evolve and
first
grow.
stories we learned along that was the Emperor's New Clothes, right?
Yep.
And everybody going along with it, and I
Yeah.
still remember that. It's like
Of
if you
course.
surround yourself with people that tell you what you want to hear, you can stay stuck.
And you will.
And you will. Yeah. And then you'll
Yep.
become naked and everybody will laugh at you.
Well, on that note,
there you go.
on that note, thank you, Marvels, for being here, for being in this space, for contributing to this space, and keeping this community open, non-judging, curious, compassionate. Thank you for that. Dana and I will see you in the next. See you, hear you, talk to you. I don't know what.
No,
Wherever
we'll
you're
be
listening
here.
to this,
We'll be here.
we'll be
next
here.
time.
We'll be here.
Yeah.
All right. As Dana says, be good to you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.